Good evening and welcome everyone. My name is Jerry Bone. I'm a farmer and cattle producer from South Central Kansas. I also serve as the Vice President of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association this year. I'm pleased to welcome you to the webinar focused on genetic selection tools tonight. We're proud to be working with several leading breed associations to bring you the latest on this topic. As a participant, your line will be muted. But feel free to type in questions in the question box on your screen during the webinar, and at the end of the presentations, we will get to as many of those as time will allow. If you have trouble with your technology, or if you're joining us only for the audio, the webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing in a few days at ncba.org. Just look for the producer tab on the website. The webinar tonight will feature Shane Bedwell, COO and Director of Breed Improvement for the American Hereford Association, Tommy Perkins, CEO of Genetic Performance Solutions, Kelly Rotalik, Director of Genetic Services for Angus Genetics, Inc., and Madi Satachi, Lead Genomicist at the International Genetic Solutions. And Madi will be starting things off, so Madi, the floor is yours to start the webinar.
Madi, we're not picking up your audio.
Sorry guys, I was muted. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me now?
We've got you.
Okay, great. So this is Madi. I'm going to talk about the IGS genetic evaluations and bulk today. So who is the IGS? IGS is actually the home for more than 12 beef breed associations globally, mostly in North America. You can see the logos of these breed associations, which they collaborated on resources and data to actually provide better selection tools for commercial cattle producers today. The goal of IGS is actually helping helping the commercial cattle by providing better tools. And as you can see today, they actually is a home for the largest multi-breed genetic evaluation database in the world, with more than 17 million animals in database, which adding more than 400,000 each year, and more than 200,000 genotype animals. So what selection tools they offer? What we have? Probably you heard about the EPDs a lot. And what's the EPD? EPD is actually the expected progeny difference, which tell us what you can expect a progeny of a given bull or animal perform compared to another animal. So I give you an example here. I have two bulls, bull A and bull B, with the EPD 0 and 10 for bull A and B respectively. So what that tell me, it doesn't tell me that every calf of the bull B are 10 pounds heavier at weaning compared to calves of bull A, but it tells me on average you can expect the calves of bull B be 10 pounds heavier. As you can see in the bell shape, some calves are heavier and some lighter, but on average, that's what EPD try to summarize and be used for selection purposes. So how we calculate EPDs? We traditionally collecting the phenotypes, performance, the animal's contemporary groups, as well as the pedigrees, and then we put them all these information together in the computing center that clean out these environment effect and consider these relationship and come out with a more clean and uniform measurement. We call it EPD to be used as a selection tool, and we have used it since a long time ago. But today we have new piece of information DNA. So DNA is actually the basis of inheritance. So we know that genes are responsible for the difference between animals and humans and plants. And so some of the difference you can see on the marbling of a bull versus other bull is due to the genes they have, but some maybe due to the nutrition, environment, management. But we try to understand part that the difference comes from the genes part. And today we can, at the low price, we can actually profile this DNA information relatively low price. And you can see there are a lot of DNA profiler in the market with the different number of data points they can offer, 50,000, 30,000, low density, high density. And how we use that DNA information, I'm trying to give you an example here that how the DNA can help us to have a better, more accurate EPDs. And what this graph shows is actually the relationship between full sieve in chicken, but actually same can be expanded to the beef, that the actual relationship measured based on the DNA profile. And you can see historically we used to use the expected value, which is 0.5. You expect 50% of genes are similar between two full sieves. But in reality, there is a variation. It could be as low as 20% or as high as 60-70%. Before DNA, we couldn't able to measure accurate that relationship. But today with this tool, we can do that. So we have this new piece of information and we can utilize it. There are several approaches to use it. On the left graph, you can see that DNA used in the two-step way, while in the right side, DNA goes with the pedigree and performance data in the same time, which called single-step evaluation. And there are some benefits for single-step. I just wanted to highlight, I'm not going to these technical details, saying there are two main single-step approach. One is based on the relationship, which use all the markers. We call it single-step G-block. But the other one is the single-step super hybrid model, which is a marker effect model, and try to actually consider the biology of the markers, which assume some markers have, or some genes may have different impact on a trait compared to other. But implementation of single-step super hybrid model actually require high computing needs, which cannot be done by old machines. So that was the limitation. We cannot use super hybrid model before. But there is an advancement in in the computer science and computer hardware that today we are trying to utilize, and that's change in the piece of DNA, a piece of computing part that is called graphic process unit, which actually developed for gaming industry, which is a big industry. But if you look at the picture at the down at the right, show you the difference between CPU, which is main part of computer for computing process, but we can use graphic processor unit or GPU for computing purpose as well. This is the new technology that is available today, and scientists noticed that using that GPU piece instead of CPU can accelerate the computing and reduce the computing time. This is just one example how that difference comes with these two different hardware. If I have the 50,000 genotypes as an animal, which is the routine today, and I want to implement single-step hybrid model that impute genotypes for all the pedigree, this is one calculation that I should do. And that's the number of 6.6 quadrillion calculation that should be done. If I use CPU, that's gonna take days or months to finish the job. But using the GPU allow me to finish the computing calculation in just 48 minutes. So that's why two scientists at Theta Solution, Dr. Garrett and Golden, tried to bring that technology in animal breeding and genetic evaluation with the collaboration with the IGS to develop a software which called Volt that can be used for multi-breed evaluation and implementing this single-step super hybrid model. This has been implemented since May 5th this year, last year basically, and runs weekly, which used to be just twice a year. So are these really both EPDs more accurate? I did some validation trying to just see, and this is at the top table, you can see that the correlation between EPDs calculated with different systems compared to actual performance of the birth, weaning, and yearling weight on the progeny of the sires. And the numbers are higher for the both EPDs. And the table 2 also at the last column was just highlighted. If I sort bulls based on the EPDs that comes from the bolt and pick the top 1%, compare the sorted EPDs based on the Cornell system, the old system, I can see the progeny of these bulls performing 16 pounds heavier at weaning weight and 40 pounds heavier at yearling weight. So that tells me that these new EPDs are more accurate and gonna to works better toward having better performance in the field. And just to also show you some summarizing the progeny equivalent on the DNA genotype animals, as you can see, adding DNA information increase the accuracy, and these numbers tell you how many progeny you should have to get similar accuracy of versus non-genotype animals, and this is really significant improvement in accuracy. So, in summary, actually, the needs for improving the accuracy is the driver for development of these genetic models that we develop over the time. And the single-step super hybrid model is really a breakthrough genomic model in accuracy development or improvement. This enabling technology, GPU, and this bold software allows us to implement this more advanced statistical model and computing power to get a better, more accurate EPDs. So EPDs was working, today is working, but we have much better EPD today, more accurate. And we as IGS always trying to get the most advanced genetic tools to develop more accurate tools for profitability of the commercial beef industry. With that, I would like to thank our partner at Theta Solution, our IGS scientist team, as my colleague at Iowa State University. Thank you very much, and I transfer that to Shane.
Thank you, Madi. Appreciate your time walking through the new innovations that have happened on the computational side of things. I think you did a great job of explaining the breakthrough that we've had throughout all breed associations relative to our genetic evaluations. At the American Hereford Association about a year ago, last December 17, we moved to the marker effects model, or the super hybrid model that Madi outlined utilizing the Bolt software. We calculate EPDs for 17 different traits and 3 different profit indexes. And so, you know, we're basically incorporating that genomic component of those animals that are genotyped and using that subset of markers from the 50,000 that come on the marker set directly into the genetic evaluation, and they are weighted based off of their influence for the respective traits. And so it's all fitting and blending very nicely with the pedigree and individual phenotypic information that comes into the genetic evaluation. We also crank our evaluation weekly, and that allows commercial producers or other seed stock breeders to have the opportunity to have the most relevant information, the most up-to-date information, and we certainly couldn't do it without the computational power. The value of buying genomically enhanced or a genomic enhanced bull, I think is critical. There's my first point here in this slide is more confidence. And the one thing that we are doing besides adding the genomic or the marker information into the animal's EPD profile is that we're also verifying parentage. I think as calving time, we're all going through that now. Two cows calve at once in the middle of the night, and we wake up and we just assume each calf goes to the correct dam. And with DNA and parent verification along with the genotype genomic component on these chips, that we're truly getting the most accurate information through that parentage information. And if something happens, we can get that switched where the prediction accuracy and the accuracy of our genetic evaluation is greatly improved since we've been adding genotypes into the system the last 8 or 9 years. And so that's one thing. Madi showed a slide that showed the accuracy improvement and the effective progeny number increase, similar to this slide. And I think it's very telling on non-parent bulls that you can almost gain a lifetime of production on a female or a use of a bull in one breeding season on this non-parent animal before he even breeds a cow. And what that gains and what we can accelerate in terms of genetic progress is really critical to making an overall better product all the way through the food chain. And so you can see the favorable increase in accuracy by trait, and then the progeny equivalency that it would take for the number of progeny being born to that bull to equal that increase in accuracy that you would gain. So at the American Hereford Association, down in the bottom right-hand corner, as you look at animals on a pedigree or on our website, the genomic logo basically reflects or lets you know that those animals have been genomically enhanced and that they are parent verified. I was asked to talk a little bit about index selection. The first indexes came about in the early 1940s, and it really took until the 90s before they were well adopted in beef sire selection in the commercial industry. The whole premise from the very beginning was to simplify sire selection and to be able to combine the most important economically relevant traits and weight them based off of their economic impact in a given production scenario. And again, those traits are met to go with a desired or a specific production scenario and to indicate profit if a set of bulls would be used in that production scenario. A little bit about economically relevant traits. They're the traits that either one, affect cost, or they're the traits that are involved with profit. And so to determine which economically relevant traits that you need to select for in a suite of EPDs, or to figure out if a selection index is the one that you need to use through a given breed association, I think it's important to first start with your breeding objective or your marketing goals and identify what strengths and weaknesses your operation has today. Look into those traits and what you can improve on relative to profitability or the cost aspect of it. And then for some operators, there's no doubt that environment can maybe constrain or dictate the potential level of performance. And so using these selection indexes and maybe gearing down on milk production in a drought scenario, or improving more, adding more cavities with a selection index is definitely something that may fit you. We don't have enough time to go through this table, but for those of you that will watch this, Dr. Spangler did a great job of putting this table together and presenting this at the Range Cow Beef Symposium. But on the left, you'll see the true economically relevant traits, and on the right are indicator traits. And relative to my talk, I kind of want to focus on, Madi shared the computational advances and the advances that we've had on the science side relative to genomics. But I think as all breed associations go over time, starting with the first basic traits of birth weight, weaning weight, yearling weight, and milk, we've advanced and been able to add more of these economically relevant traits to our suite of EPDs. And that's because of not only the added phenotypes that we've gained on some of these hard to measure traits, like some of the carcass traits, mature cow weight, dry matter intake, sustained cow fertility, stayability, whatever trait is being used within the respective association. But genomics have also allowed us to get there as well. We couldn't have done it without some of the indicator traits on the right, but I think as we've evolved selection indexes, we've definitely been able to get to a point that we're at today. And so I just kind of wanted to share, you know, we all kind of went through this change as breed associations relative to the methodology that we've used over time here recently within the last 2 or 2.5 years. But we've also evolved our suite of traits and incorporated these new traits into our selection indexes. And so I thought I would give a comparison to kind of highlight those with our one of our female indexes, or all-purpose index that we have, Baldy maternal index. The production scenario and the given kind of target that this is set it for really didn't change in the beginning and today. The thought was to use Hereford bulls on mature Angus cows. We'll keep a percentage of those females back in the herd, and then the rest of the calf crop, the coal heifers and the steers, are going to be fed out in the feedlot and retained and then marketed on a grid. And so, as you can imagine, the component traits that make up this index are both maternal and terminal indexes. Well, at the time our old BMI was formulated, we really weren't at the point to maybe have some of the traits that we're at today. You can see the kind of the staple cavities as the economically relevant trait rather than birth weight is in there. Weaning weight, yearling weight, milk, cavities maternal, scrotal, back fat, ribeye area, and marbling kind of made up the relative weightings of those selection indexes. And the relative weightings are the component traits with their economic value in this given production scenario. And so we kind of had to work through that somewhat. As you can imagine, weaning weight, we obviously wanted growth in those calves. We wanted those bulls to be used and calve with no problem. But actually, yearling weight was used in this model to suppress those cows from those daughters from getting too big in the herd. And we also used that to suppress feed efficiency and kind of monitor and where those cows could be more efficient. The carcass traits kind of stand for themselves, but scrotal was one of those traits that we used. And if you remember back to the table, it was an indicator trait for fertility and longevity relative to sustained cow fertility. And so we didn't have the trait that we call today sustained cow fertility. And so we used scrotal in that model, and that was the best that we had at the time. Our new generation index utilizes some of the old traditional traits that we've had all along, but significant weighting kind of goes into what I have highlighted in red. And so we were able to release a dry matter intake EPD. We added the genomic component to mature cow weight and have that weighted in our BMI. Carcass weight, since these cattle are being marketed at finish time, that is the economic trait of importance, and so that makes up a big weighting in the terminal side of this. And then we were able to directly get at sustained cow fertility. And so I think all breed associations have gone through a similar change with kind of the new genetic evaluation rollout that have made these indexes more accurate and more targeted for these given production settings. One thing I'll leave you with, just a reminder on all indexes, is that you can get a high index value and not always are all component traits going to be superior. If an animal leans off the chart top 1% of the breed for one trait, he could be in the 75th percentile for another trait. And so still looking at the traits after you've sorted on one of these indexes is important. And then breed improvement advancement of a breed are not always the same as profit index goals for the commercial industry. And so as seed stock producers and those of you that are on here, you may need to improve on one specific trait that doesn't make up a big component trait weighting in these indexes. With that, that's all I have. I've enjoyed being on here. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Tommy Perkins with the International Brangus Breeders Association.
Thank you, Shane. I appreciate the introduction, and you did a great job, as I expected you would. I also want to thank Josh White. Thank you for organizing this and the whole NCBA education team. Just bringing these great webinars to the seed stock industry and the commercial industry is just a great opportunity for all those that are on board listening. So just a little introduction about GPS. Most of you, I was introduced as the CEO of Genetic Performance Solutions. We do represent the International Brangus Breeders Association as well as the Brangus Association of America. We also represent a couple other smaller breeds, but we have about 2 million records in our database, so we represent quite a few cattle. John Janot of Livestock Genetic Services, who is now owned by Neogen Corporation, has really been the driver to our genetic selection tools in the last 5 years. He now has the help of Dr. J.R. Tate, Dr. Nick Wu. We sure appreciate those opportunities. As we look at kind of what the American breeds have done, and again, I appreciate Josh inviting us to be a part of this webinar. We have followed the single-step GBLUP method for basically the beginning of the, I guess, GEP technology. Very much like you see in the dairy industry, you see in the swine industry. I know that Dr. Matisachi talked about the hybrid, some of those, but we have pretty much stayed with the traditional single-step. And have made great success with those and some improvements, just like we've seen in some of the other industries. I'm going to show you some slides in a minute that kind of talk about where we, IBBA and the BAA organizations, have actually moved. We really started that process in 2015 with the Genomic Enhanced EPDs. Currently, we have about 25,000 Brangus with Genomic Enhanced EPDs, and about, there's probably about 500 Brondy with those same GEPDs. And I'll talk about kind of how we got there. This slide gets a little busy, but as you look at it, and I think we could take the top 8, maybe 10 largest breed associations. We could probably put this slide up there and represent each one of them. Perhaps maybe the dollar values will be a little bit different in terms of magnitude based on the numbers of cattle they register. But this is kind of what we've seen with genomics. When I came on board in 2013 with GPS, we were basically running about $30,000 of expenses on the genomic side of it. Look what happened in 2014 and then what has gone through 2018. Well, let's talk a little bit about how we got there. And again, I think some of the other breed associations will be very similar to this. In about late 2013, early 2014, we were hit with a genetic condition called developmental duplication. Most of you that may be in some other breeds are very familiar with that one. That happened to be one of the genetic conditions that impacted our breed at a greater level than any of the other genetic conditions. But with that, you saw an increase in the total dollars being spent on genomics. But we're also transitioning from the old technology of parent verification. And I know Shane talked about this just a little bit, the importance or how parent verification is so important moving forward. It's been my experience with two breed associations now that we run about 7 to 10% misidentified parents in the seed stock industry. And that's a level that, you know, is probably most folks don't understand or believe, but as a commercial cattleman, you're buying these seed stock bulls to put on your commercial cows. Again, this improvement and lowering that misparent validation is really improved the genetic tools that we've got there available for you. I think when we've migrated from the old microsatellite technology to the SNP technology, we've done a better service to the industry. And I will make a comment about the American breeds and really compliment the genomics companies. They've done a really nice job of helping us identify the number of SNP markers that we needed to identify parentage. So traditional, it's the USDA 96 markers that you would have for validating parentage, but we found with the Bos Indicus influence breeds that we need additional markers to do that. Now we're at 220 markers. And this is pretty consistent amongst the genomics companies. And again, we do a much better job of validating parentage because of that. I think Marty talked about these particular different panels that are out there. We started with the 50K like most everybody did, and that seems to be the gold standard to impute to that 50K. But we also saw that a lot of our breeders use the 80K. Many of them still use the 150K on some of the AI sires and donor dams. The University of Missouri came out with a 250K product that was being utilized by several. And then if you've got to look at some other further testing, maybe in some genetic conditions, those kind of things, you might want to go to a panel as high as a 770K. And we find those are not used at nearly the highest level as what we see now. I think the biggest increase we saw in late 2017, moving into 2018, we saw some reduced panels that allowed us to lower the price. Therefore, more seed stock breeders could be utilizing the tool. Now we impute this I-50K and this ULD or 30K up to this 50K we're currently using in Genomic Enhanced EPDs. And I think this is what's driven genomics in the industry, not just for our breed, but just across all that we look at. We always talk about, we've had 3 presentations tonight, all 3 have basically said the same thing, that genomic testing really does improve the accuracy of these unproven bulls. And you saw anywhere from, I think 2 was the lowest I saw, up to 17 or 18 in the previous presentations. And that's really big when we talk about commercial cattlemen putting a lot of stock in buying unproven bulls. If you can move that accuracy from 0.1 to 0.25 to 0.3 without those bulls producing progeny, I think it makes your job much easier to identify, or more accurately identify those bulls that really will go on and work for you and produce progeny that fit your bottom dollar. And I think Shane made this comment as well. Probably the biggest impact that we as seed stock producers can do for the commercial industry is to start testing all our females. Because if we can test these females and get those genomic enhanced EPDs, again, I think Shane used the term a lifetime of production, just as I've got, you know, if we can identify those females that we keep back at the seed stock level, again, without her producing 20 progeny in her lifetime with one single DNA test, I just think it's incredible genetic gain that we can make, and a really big service to the beef cattle industry. And the last one here probably says that at the most, when I get the phone calls from breeders, they're always concerned that they did genomic enhanced EPDs and the EPD actually got worse. Well, that's going to happen because we've improved the accuracy of these EPDs. We didn't tell you it's going to raise it or lower it because it go either direction. So it really impacted the accuracy itself and not whether the EPD got higher or lower. This slide looks a little busy, but this is what I see when I talk to seed stock producers, when I talk to commercial cattlemen, when they go out and look at a set of EPDs. This just happens to be what we have at Brangus. We've got 14 EPDs there staring you in the face. You see those and your eyes get glazed over a bit and you wonder where you start. Many of you focus on 1, maybe 2 traits, and you just kind of let the others fall to the wayside. And I think that you're like anyone else, that it maybe slow you down from a genetic standpoint, but we've got tools on the horizon. They're going to make that a little better for you, and Shane talked about those. As I move into that, we did decide that we needed 3 new EPDs at the Brangus Association. We've now released Hereford pregnancy, stability, and mature cow weight. And the reason that those came about was the need for the economic selection indexes that we now produce for our breeders. And this is, you've seen this many times if you've gone to any genetics type presentations, and you can clearly see there that you can use 1, 2, 3 infinite number of traits in this index, weight them appropriately from an economic standpoint, and then you should make better genetic gains because of that. And that's basically what Shane talked about in his presentation. At the seed stock level, we have come up with 2 of those particular indexes, one of those being a maternal index, the other a terminal index. And I find that the most important thing is that you, as Shane said, you set your goals appropriately so that you know which one of these indexes to utilize. If you're keeping back replacement females, that maternal index is probably the one you want to use. If you're going to be carrying those cattle to the end point, feed them through the feedlot, hang them upside down, and collect the carcass data, then you probably need to use a terminal index. I think this is one that we haven't talked about much tonight, but there is a commercial product available for most anyone out there, whether you're using Angus cattle, Hereford cattle, Brangus. There are some commercially identified products. In our case, it's Identity Brangus. In our case, we have maternal, terminal, and an all-purpose index. It really allows you, the commercial cattleman, to take the best advantage of these genomic enhanced EPDs at your level. And again, select your replacement females and or your calves you're going to feed out with much more confidence. We have, as most breed associations, we're always looking ahead. And as you can see, we got a show animal in front of you, and when you start showing those animals, the phenotype's always good, but sometimes you bring some traits with you that may be not wanted. In this case, we are involved in a hair study project. It's hair shedding with Dr. Jared Decker at the University of Missouri, because we are wanting to make sure these cattle acclimate to those southern climates and can shed that hair off and do what they're supposed to do. We're also looking at a feet and leg scoring data collection program. We're collecting lots of data there, and we'll hopefully have EPDs in the future along those lines. We're also working with Dr. Raluca Matiascu at the University of Florida, where she's looking at some thermal tolerance research that's going to be real impactful for the beef industry, whether at the seed stock level or the commercial level. But the last thing that we're working on right now is, many of you may have heard of Embryon. It's a company out of Kansas that are doing some sexing and genomic testing of embryos prior to implantation. This is one that at the association level becomes a little more complicated, because you wind up having to register these embryos prior to ever implanting them into a recipient dam. Because what we're trying to do is to assign a genomic enhanced EPD on those embryos so that we'll implant the sex we want and or the best genomic enhanced EPD embryo leading up to that. You do lose a little conception rate on those embryos that have been biopsied, but one of those new selection tools on the horizon, you're going to see more in the future. Just 2 more slides, I think. Again, I just want to kind of summarize what the other 2 presenters have talked about. Genomics will not replace performance data collection. I've got an ultrasound slide here, and I hear that all the time from folks that want to quit ultrasounding their cattle. Unfortunately, we can't quit ultrasounding. We can't quit weighing our calves. We still got to collect that phenotype data in order for the genomics to be utilized to its maximum potential. I'll finish up with this slide. I really compliment the beef industry. I'm on my way out as a breed exec, headed to West Texas A&M University back to being a professor. But I really compliment the breed associations and their breed improvement committees for really identifying these selection tools that work best for you in the seed stock and commercial industry. They've done a well of a job and continue to improve those. The genomic enhanced EPDs, I think, have probably been the single best thing that's happened in the 10 years I've been a breed exec, because it really has helped the commercial industry identify those superior genetics at a much younger time in these animals' life. And some say that gets you to the ditch quicker, but I think it really gets you to the end point at a much faster pace. And lastly, I'll finish off with genomic enhanced EPDs have really accelerated the rate of genetic gain. really because we cut that generation interval down with the use of these net increase in accuracy. So again, I'll finish there, and I'm going to pass the torch on to Ms. Kelly Ritalik. She's the Director of Genetic Services at Angus Genetics Incorporated.
Well, thank you, Tommy. So I get to round out the night, and tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do at Angus Genetics, and then obviously round out with some kind of the novel tools that we're working on as a breed association as a whole. So Angus Genetics is basically wholly owned subsidiary of the American Angus Association. We have 4 research geneticists on staff and then 9 customer service representatives dedicated to everything genetics and genomics. So not only do we have partnerships within our own branch of our American Angus Association, but we do have strategic partnerships out in the industry with companies like Zoetis and Neogen to provide genomic seed stock tools, genomic profiles such as the HD50K and Angus GS to our seed stock breeders, but as well as having a commercial slate of basically genomic tests with GeneMax Advantage and GeneMax Focus. So we do provide genetic services for 5 other breeds along with the American Angus Association, where we will do their genetic evaluation services, providing them specific EPDs and dollar indexes where they feel fit for their individual breed associations. So getting into it, we do provide a comprehensive weekly genetic evaluation. We've provided a weekly genetic evaluation since about 2010, and that is really when genomics started coming onto the scene for Angus. We started incorporating genomics kind of in those old models that Madi talked about right at the beginning, kind of in that blended approach in a correlated trait model. And then recently in July of 2017, we went to a single-step GBLUP model. And just briefly, I'm going to touch on what does that single-step model mean to you as a breeder, if you're an Angus breeder, if you're looking at registered Angus bulls to bring into your commercial cow herd. And it's really all about redefining the traditional pedigree relationship. So I think we can all agree that, you know, when we look at progeny, we're 50% related to the sire, 50% related to the dam, which makes good sense. But in our traditional pedigrees, we would also say that we're 25% equally related to each one of our grandparents. And I think as we all think about, you know, our siblings, we think about our children, we think about even the calves that drop on the ground here this winter, that we know that full sibs don't always look the same. Even when they're parent verified, we find that, you know, they can have different growth weights. You look very different from your older brothers and sisters. And the reason for that is we don't all get equal chunks of DNA, right, from our grandparents. So on average, we're always going to be about 50% related to our parents. You know, when we think about cattle, we might actually be a little bit more due to some inbreeding. But when we think about our single-step technology, what we're doing is we're using these genotypes to track gene segments as they get passed down. And so if I'm 31% more related to my paternal grandsire, right, higher than the average 25%, and I'm more related to that paternal grandsire, and that paternal grandsire is a proven marbling rock star, as a young calf, I'm actually going to be predicted at a higher marbling EPD than my parent average because of the fact that I contain more genes from him, which is going to drive up my marbling EPD as a young calf. And so when you talk about that single-step approach, basically you do 3 things with genomics, right? We've all seen a progeny equivalent slide here tonight. We talk about increasing accuracy. We can evaluate traits at earlier ages, and we can get at those difficult to measure traits. And the one thing that we haven't talked about with progeny equivalence is basically each person that's presented on this, all 4 of us here tonight, we all have slightly different degree of progeny equivalence. And a lot of that can be a function of how much data you have behind each one of those traits. But the other part of it I want people to realize is it also has to do with the amount of heritability that's behind each one of those traits. And so in most cases, your lower heritability traits, you're going to need more progeny equivalents, right? More progeny records to get us at that same degree of accuracy that we're used to seeing. So just something to keep in mind when you're moving through those progeny equivalents. And then in general, anytime that we talk about how great our genomic evaluations are, I think that Tommy did a really good job of driving this home to us, you know, in his last presentation, is that the only reason our genomics work so well is because you guys as producers have done a great job of basically connecting the performance data to those genomic tools. A lot of times I talk to breeders and they really want to put the data and the DNA in different buckets. They're either a fan of one and not a fan of the other. And I think the thing that we had to drive home is that the genomic predictions that we make are only based on the data that we get in-house. And so while it's impressive to have 600,000 genotypes, it's imperative that we keep collecting the real data, right? The carcass records, the scrotal measurements, the growth traits, so that we can continue to gain accuracy with these types of tools. And as we move on to kind of our genetic selection tools, you know, all of us are really kind of in our second generation of genomic evaluation. We've moved from those multi-trait type models to these single step models, whether you're using the Bolt software or you're using the UGA single step software. And the thing that we had to remember is that both of them are better when we compare them to the old ones. And so when we talk about second generation, this is really starting to move us forward in the things that we can do. When we talk about the genomics tools, we've been able to start to create things like specific breed panels that basically allows us to take up all the real estate on those chips so we can start to build really, really good genomic research databases, which allows us to start to look at traits and look at things that our sidekicks over in the Holstein industry have really been able to research for about a decade. And one of those things that we're using our genomic database for is to research fertility. And so I'm sure a lot of you have heard in the Holstein world that basically net merit's a pretty big deal. So that would be kind of their all-purpose index, and net merit drives a lot of milk production in the dairy industry, as you might guess. But the thing you can see up in that top left graph is the fact is they continue to use that net merit index to get more and more production. You can basically see that in the bottom right corner that their daughter pregnancy rate continued to decrease. And it decreased for a long time. You can see that dotted line in there at about 2009. That's when Holstein actually implemented haplotypes in their net merit index and in their daughter pregnancy rate. And what haplotypes are, it's just basically a fancy word to say chunks of DNA. And what we find in the Holstein industry is that when we have two parents and they each have one copy of the same chunk of DNA, we never find it in the two copy form. So if you look at that little Punnett square down there in the bottom left-hand corner, basically we would always find the big R and the little r, right, in our live animals, but we would never find the homozygotes. And what that's telling us is that because we never find those live homozygotes, that could be affecting embryo viability. And so we might actually be losing those embryos in utero. And so we took a page from the Holstein industry and started to research this out to see if we could find the same things in the beef industry so we can continue to push things like growth and marbling, carcass weight, etc., but also make sure that the fertility of our animals remain at the highest level for our commercial cattlemen. The next thing I want to talk on is basically we're still selecting for our fundamental values, right? Foot structure is something that we all need. Structure is basically the foundation of all of our herds, right? And so in 2015, we began collecting foot scores from our members. We collect two scores. We collect claw set and foot angle. And basically they're on a 1 to 9 scale, with 5 being ideal. And then in the summer of 2017, we actually had enough data collected to allow us to start to research this particular trait out. We found that both traits have heritability estimates of about 0.25, so roughly about the same heritability of something like weaning weight. And then with the 16,000 animals that we already have scored, we were able to publish actually 2 research reports out of this particular data set, with a slated EPD release for both claw set and foot angle being in June of 2019. So even though we have all this wonderful genomic data, we're not setting aside these fundamental traits that are so important to the cattle industry, and still are trying to push forward with our traditional genomic evaluations with these novel traits. The next one that we're researching is basically the high altitude disease. And how can we use pulmonary arterial pressure measurements, or basically those PAP scores, to allow us to select the animals for this specific environment. High altitude disease, or basically brisket disease, as many of us know it, is basically really starting to challenge our breeders, and have always challenged our breeders at high altitudes. And we've been able to collect PAP scores from our breeders. We've been able to have good relationships with people like Colorado State University to really look at, you know, where our elevation breaks, what's considered a high elevation measurement, or what's considered a low elevation measurement, and how do we really model this trait that can be heavily influenced by the environment. So basically this February, we released a research report on PAP score. It's for yearling PAP score to basically help us find the animals that are basically less susceptible to high altitude disease. And we've used these traits. We have high altitude measurements, which are 5,500 feet and above. And then we have low altitude or moderate altitude measurements, which are basically 4,000 to 5,500 feet. And we found heritability estimates of a 32 and 16%. With that, we did launch a research PAP EPD here in February in hopes to move to a production EPD, or basically a weekly EPD evaluation for PAP later this year. And then finally, the last thing I'm going to touch on is something that both Shane and Tommy touched on. It's kind of this idea of second generation selection tools. So we've been working with a group called Abacus Bio from New Zealand to basically rebuild our dollar values. Our dollar values were implemented in 2004, and while I think they were really efficient at the time, our cattle have changed in the last 14 years. We have more cattle grading choice than ever before. We have cattle that are just functionally different, and we have traits that we didn't have before. And so we've taken a unique approach with this group to first survey our membership, which was completed last summer. We had over 3,000 respondents that basically allowed us to kind of get a feel for our membership, get our membership's input, and really start to figure out where they're placing value for these traits. Out of the 2,000 totally completed surveys, basically cow survivability, to no one's surprise, comes right to the top of the list. And basically all of our cow traits are really dominating the top part of that list. So that tells us what directions we need to go, and we combine that with obviously hard science and economic assumptions and very good selection index model building that allows us to basically complete and make a more sophisticated model for $W, or basically our maternal index, and basically update our $B model that will allow us to really continue to drive genetic progress into the future. And so I guess the take-home message here is the fact that, you know, just because we feel like we're in a good place with our genomic evaluations, and I feel like all of our groups are, we continue to push the envelope and try to figure out these tools that can really start to have an impact from maybe not just an output standpoint or production and growth standpoint, but also try to offset some of that with some of these novel traits, such as Tommy talked about hair shedding and meat tenderness, and all these other novel traits such as foot structure, udder traits, and other things like that that really help us drive us into the future. So with that, I'm going to wrap up for the night, and I'm going to hand it back to our NCBA Vice President, Jerry Bone, to wrap us up.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you to all of our presenters tonight for your presentations. NCBA is about bringing the latest relevant information to our members in the industry. Each of our presenters has certainly helped us achieve that goal tonight. As we move into our question and answer session, I want to encourage you to consider joining us for our spring legislative conference in Washington, D.C. from April 2nd to April 4th. Please visit ncba.org for more information. Also, be sure to sign up for our March webinar, Planning for Synchronization Success. The webinar will be the first in a series focused on reproduction, featuring members of the Beef Reproduction Task Force. Registration will open tomorrow, February 22nd at ncba.org under the Producer tab. Now we're going to get to your questions. Thank you again for participating in the webinar tonight. I'm going to turn the webinar over to Josh White to moderate the question and answer session.
All right, thanks, Jerry. Again, I'll just echo thanks to all of our presenters, and I'll kick it to one of our presenters at a time, and then or to lead off, and then you guys can chime in behind the lead on that. One of the questions, Kelly, if you're still close by was particularly around marbling and asking, is there a ideal marbling score? What kind of guidance could you give producers around selecting bulls if they're trying to get more prime beef? Is there a target EPD for marbling score, or how would you advise them to make that genetic change?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great question, and a question obviously we get quite frequently. Everyone's trying to get after those grid premiums. So the one thing I will say is, first, I think the biggest thing is we do have to know our cow herds a little bit. It's always easier to know where you want to go if you know where you are. But I will say that we do work obviously closely with certified Angus beef, and we have come up with at least a few recommendations for that program in particular, being that if you're looking at the breed average Angus animal, that you want to be at least breed average or above for marbling, and breed average or above for our dollar grid value, which would be our selection index value to basically get at those grid premiums. Obviously, if you're already grading a high percentage of choice animals and you're trying to get into that prime category, that's where it really comes in to kind of know where you're currently at to know where you want to go. And so obviously, if you have a average Angus herd, or if you have above average Angus herd, that's going to determine, you know, really what kind of bull you got to use on those. But like I said, with our CAB program, our recommendations are that you use at least a breed average bull for marbling EPD and a breed average bull for dollar G.
Any of the rest of you want to chime in on that? All right, hearing none, we'll move on. And Shane Bedwell, if you want to get ready to reply to this one, it's a question really dealing with, and you referenced, Shane, some of the maternal traits. So how do you sort of account for maybe stocking rate if you're chasing some of the higher growth or milk or heavier mature weight traits? You know, how do you adjust for that and think about that with cow maintenance costs in your replacement heifers, and how do you balance those decisions?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think it's all about a balance, and you know, depending on what area of the country that you're in and what feed resources that you have available, maybe you know, the opportunity cost is doesn't outweigh the expense, and so you know, having those higher octane, higher producing cattle, as long as you think the bottom line of the next generation of progeny is equaling that, that makes sense. I think another way to look at it is having you know, a lower input cow and increasing stocking rate in your herd to go at that is definitely critical as well. And so those selection indexes that factor in an all-purpose index kind of weigh out a general kind of a production environment and a stocking rate in those indexes, but still give you a great output and an end product to market as well. And so it's a balance and not getting too tipped forward one way or the other.
All right, I'll just pause and see if any of our other presenters would like to weigh in on that cow efficiency balance question.
Yeah, I think with the cow efficiency deal, I think Shane hit it on the head. I mean, we have those EPDs. You know, Hereford just added a mature weight EPD, and we have a mature weight EPD here at the American Angus Association. And really, when you're trying to get at maintenance efficiency, your two biggest drivers are going to be basically milk EPD and your mature weight. And I think we all do try to do a good job of modeling them in those maternal indexes, and they do a good job of modeling in their balding maternal index. And so I think you just have to make sure that if you are in a more arid environment and you're worried about cow maintenance efficiency, you know, use your tools as presented to you and maybe single trait select, or maybe put a little more downward pressure on something like mature size that will help you keep that maintenance energy in check.
All right, Dr. Sachi, I think this next one will be coming for you. We've got a lot of questions flowing in here. Keep sending them. I will mention very briefly that if we don't get to your question tonight, we will be able to respond directly by email since you signed in with an email address. So hopefully you gave us a good email address, and we will be able to get you an answer from the panel or from a specific presenter for that question. Dr. Sachi, the question here is, why was there such a drastic change for some of the breeds when you went to the single step or some of the more recent advances, changing your EPD calculations? And a follow-up to that, do you see any other technology advancements or changes that are going to yield similar, what this participant is calling drastic change to the EPD calculations?
So I think, as we discussed, the main driver for these changes is the need for more accurate EPDs, because EPDs are estimates, so that's why they come with the accuracy, how confident you are about those EPDs. So I think the main drivers that these breed associations decided to get together and collaborate on data is, first, the main thing is improving the accuracy. And then the second purpose was to provide a platform to make the comparison across breeds. So I think this multi-breed genetic evaluation is a great tool to help the breeders to decide or compare the bulls from one breed across other breeds, and also consider some crossbreeding and heterosis. So I think these are the main drivers. And your second question about what we can expect main change, I think as we go, definitely there are more development on the models. But I think as the other panelists that talked today, adding novel traits, that's why I expect to see more in the beef industry. We will have more novel traits will be added using these new technologies, like health-related traits, feed efficiency, and yeah, that's my answer.
Anyone else like to weigh in on that?
Josh,
I think one. Go ahead, Tommy.
Josh, I'd like to just add one comment. I think that second part of the question was, where we're going to move in the future, and are there big changes coming? I wonder, how we address this heterosis. There's so much talk about hybrid vigor in the industry, and now we have these genomic tools that we can do a better job of measuring heterosis. And as we as breed associations get better at truly estimating those heterosis values that go along with these multi-breed models, I think that we're going to see some big changes there as well.
Shane, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think the one thing that's important to understand that, as we all transition to a new methodology and a updated genetic evaluation, is what we were all doing before was not necessarily wrong. And as we've advanced with our systems and our methodology, we had to keep up with any other technology and business out there to be able to adapt for the future. And so all of our systems, no matter what we're doing, I think allows us for that adaptability moving forward. And Kelly did a nice job of actually, explaining very well the level of inheritance. And some of those traditional models were based off of that equal 50% coming from the sire and the dam. And now we can drill down into those animals and see exactly or get a better estimate of what they're actually inheriting. And so being able to gain and get that information is one of the many things that's helped improve the prediction and the quality of prediction that we're having. And so some of those animals certainly could have changed based off of that methodology of where they're more like the high growth sire, and you know, the dam maybe didn't have that growth, and they were getting the benefit of that animal in the very beginning of a 50-50 split, but now they're more like the sire and what they inherited in terms of their growth genes. And so they bumped up, you know, substantially in terms of growth.
Good answers and great clarification. Dr. Perkins, this one is for you, and it's fairly detailed. I'm going to raise it up a level, and then I may forward you the question so you can answer it one-on-one for this gentleman. But he's basically asking if you could provide some additional information on the fertility index and what will go into that making up or weighting in that index.
Yeah, that's a great question, and probably would be better one-on-one, but I will tell him that it, because we too have a mature cow weight EPD, and we've tied that along with body condition score taken at the same time the cow weight was taken. So that would play a big part of that particular index, but we also have looked at stayability goes into that model, and this is the ability of that cow to stay in the herd for at least 6 years. And then we'll also put a little pressure on heifer pregnancy, her ability to get pregnant prior to 30 months of age. But it's a bit more detail than that. The ultrasound plays a little bit in that particular selection index as well as weaning weight, but probably a better email back to him to get the specifics.
Thank you, sir. Question here that's maybe a little bit, there's a few questions about crossbreeding, and Dr. Perkins, I think you addressed that somewhat, that you obviously don't think that ultimately crossbreeding and heterosis will be left behind, which was one question, and anyone else is welcome to weigh in on that facet of it. Another question is the trend we're seeing, especially over the last 3 to 5 years, of more dairy cows that are maybe in the lower end of whatever that dairy producer is striving for genetically, being bred to beef bulls to develop 50-50 offspring to come into to add more value to those carcasses of those animals coming into the beef supply. And is there anyone that's willing to admit trying to figure out some of the advantages there, and what type of genetics will work well in that scenario, or do you see that happening in the future? And I'll just leave that open to anyone who's willing to take a shot at it if you want to.
Yeah, this is Mari. Maybe I can give some comments here. That, I mean, at Iowa State, we are trying to develop projects exactly related to the beef and dairy purpose, and looking at this, answering this question, what genetics would be fit better for that purpose using beef and dairy crosses. And I think those that are in the dairy industry use the beef semen, they know that calving is important, because that's a problem with dairy using the heavy or low calving is bulls. One of the issue with the Holstein specifically is the ribeye area, which is not good. So looking for the bulls from beef industry with a good or high EPD and their ribeye also is something they're looking for, as well as some growth as carcass traits. So this, I think this is a market we should consider. This is going to increase, and I think these are the traits that are important. But research is coming to see what exact genetics will fit better. Yeah.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that one? Or on the crossbreeding question?
I think Monty did a great job of kind of sharing the breed complementary of what can work well with Holstein, but as an entire industry, as we move forward and try to do more with less, and maximizing the potential and the advancements that all breeds have made in terms of progress, and fitting those multiple breeds together, whether it be 2 or 3 or 4, in a crossbreeding scenario, I think is a big benefit, particularly to some of those low-hanging fruits like fertility and longevity that we can improve in one cross. Definitely the health advantages that you get with heterosis, and the maternal heterosis is a big one that we will continue to focus on.
All right, I think this will be our last question. And again, thank you all for sticking with us. A lot of our participants sticking on through all the questions. You know, how do you account for the relationship between traits, correlations or negative correlations? And the specific question here is, does lower fat composition or marbling, how does that relate to ribeye size? And is selection for one or the other, you know, detrimental or beneficial? And I'll let Kelly start this one off.
Yeah, so obviously a lot of our traits that we have, really any of our traits, are always going to have a correlation to other things. And when you start talking about, you know, those particular carcass traits in ribeye area and fat and those types of things, you know, there's obviously correlations between those traits. And you know, you think of ribeye size and how that's detrimental or how it increases. You know, if you look at kind of the Angus genetic evaluation, we do have a correlation fit between fat thickness in ribeye area. And basically what that correlation is around negative 0.34. So obviously, as you guys know, correlations, right, range from -1 to +1. And when we have a negative correlation, that basically means as one trait goes up, the other trait goes down. And so with a negative 0.34 correlation, well, it's a fairly moderately low correlation between those two traits. That would mean as you select, or if you increase the amount of fat, you would slightly decrease the amount of ribeye area, and vice versa. As you increase the ribeye area that you select, you will inadvertently then decrease the amount of fat thickness on that animal. And so that's how you can kind of read those correlations. When we come up with those correlations, obviously that's directly out of the data, right? So all of us do things such as genetic parameter estimation, and what we're doing with that estimation is basically telling us what the data tells us. So the data that you guys send in as producers, right? What does that tell us about how those traits are intercorrelated? And so, you know, basically that's out of the real data. That's not me or Marty or Tommy or Shane just saying, hey, this is what we think it is. It's distinctly out of the data that you guys report to us. So
this is Maddie. I want to say that maybe that also relates to the question, what could come next, is that now we know the genomics is the kind of mature technology for improving EPDs, genomic enhanced EPDs. But as Kelly mentioned, how we use genomics to adjust the relationship between individuals, show that how that can change the relationship between progeny and the grandparent, deviating from 25% to some other numbers. In future, maybe we can use this technology to actually dissect genetic correlation between traits. And what I mean, we can have different relationships between individuals based on the genes related to the marbling and ribeye or back fat. Today, we are just using single point correlations that we come up with the data. We use data that we get from you, as Kelly mentioned. But actually, maybe once we get more advanced models, we can fit different correlations for different breeding groups.
Excellent. Well, with that, we've been on 15 minutes longer than the top of the hour. A lot of great questions. And again, we will pass those along if yours didn't get answered here on the webinar. I want to ask everyone that attended, if you would take time to respond to the survey as we end the webinar. You'll get a survey link, and we'll have another email follow-up with some information about the recording that'll let you take a survey as well. We do take that input in programming for the future. Thanks again to all of our presenters, and go to the website where you signed up for this one for the next round. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you, Josh.
Thanks, George.